At the zenith of his absolute power, a man strides across the ruins of a conquered Europe. Millions of German citizens venerate him as the greatest military strategist of his era, an incomparable genius whose vision transformed a defeated nation into a continental powerhouse. Yet, what the masses believe to be true is nothing more than a meticulously orchestrated construct of lies. This is the narrative of how reality begins to penetrate the propaganda machine, sustaining an empire, of how a leader commits the greatest strategic blunder of his career, and of how, hidden from public view, his leadership gradually crumbles. 18 months after the global conflict began, the German dictator appears to dominate the entire world. He has restored his nation to greatness, transforming a people once terrified by the prospect of war into a population reassured by the promise of swift victory. His citizens see him as a supreme commander who delivers conquest after conquest without the devastating suffering that still haunts the collective memory of the previous Great War. Behind him, the populace believes, stands a brilliant and cohesive party leadership, a perfectly synchronized political machine. But this carefully constructed facade is about to show its first visible cracks. In the early summer of 1941, a lone German officer parachutes into a field in southern Scotland. Local guards, stunned by the discovery, quickly capture him and transport him to London, where British interrogators await him with incredulity. Initially, no one believes his extraordinary story, but as details emerge, a remarkable narrative unfolds. The solitary parachutist is none other than the supreme vice leader and the German dictator's oldest associate, Rudolf Hess. Hess has been a prominent figure in the political movement since the 1920s, having served as personal secretary throughout that entire trajectory. He represents a crucial cog in the political machine, someone widely recognized and celebrated across the nation. The question tormenting the British interrogators was simple yet disturbing. What was he doing alone on British soil? As interrogations progress, Hess reveals that his secret mission involved peace negotiations with Great Britain. The British are perplexed, unable to comprehend the logic behind such an undertaking, but then an even more revealing truth emerges. Hess's private mission is not truly about peace. His central concern is that, amidst the internal power struggles within the political leadership, he is losing his position as the dictator's closest confidant. He imagined that by executing this extraordinary diplomatic coup, he could restore his own image and importance within the hierarchy of power. It is a desperate idea, but critically, it represents the first public sign that the political leadership, far from being united, is in fact a seething cauldron of rivalry and internal conflict. But what would be the impact of this revelation on the power structure? This is the question that keeps the British fascinated and the Germans in shock. The discovery exposes something deeply rotten at the top of the political structure. When the dictator receives the news through a letter left by Hess, his reaction is one of absolute fury. He summons his advisors and shouts furious orders. This is perhaps the first moment a senior political leader publicly breaks ranks, creating a crisis of monumental proportions and generating the greatest embarrassment the regime has ever faced. Hess's betrayal places the dictator in an impossible position. How to maintain the illusion of a united leadership when reality clearly demonstrates the opposite? The task of rewriting this narrative for the German public falls on the shoulders of Joseph Goebbels, the minister responsible for disseminating information. Goebbels is one of the dictator's most trusted and capable confidants, a man whose ability to resolve crises is practically legendary. When a problem arises, Goebbels is the expert at transforming it, recontextualizing it, and presenting it in a way that serves the regime's interests. Since the outbreak of the global conflict, Goebbels has exercised absolute control over all German media from his ministry in Berlin. But the current situation represents an unprecedented challenge for any narrative manipulation expert. How to restore the credibility of a united leadership when the second most powerful man in the regime has just fled to the enemy. Goebbels' solution is elegantly simple. Present Hess as an isolated rotten apple. Goebbels addresses the defection by portraying Hess as a man who lost his mental sanity, someone who succumbed to the pressure of work and whose responsibilities broke him under the weight of stress. It is a response that many Germans find hard to accept. The narrative does not resonate well with the population, who naturally question if the supreme vice leader is insane. Why does he remain in his post? The Hess crisis eventually passes, but it leaves an indelible mark. For the first time, the image of the dictator's leadership is exposed as seriously misaligned with the underlying reality. This gap between perception and truth is about to dramatically widen. In the summer of 1941, the dictator executes what he promised. Since his early days in the Munich beer halls, he invades Russia. For the German leader, this is the final confrontation with his greatest ideological enemy, Bolshevik communism. In his view, it is a matter of existence. Either Nazism conquers Soviet Bolshevism, or Stalin and the Soviet Union will eventually conquer and exterminate the German people. There is no middle ground, only victory or annihilation. As German troops advance through Russia, the dictator is also fulfilling something he wrote in his political manifesto 16 years earlier. He is conquering Lebensraum, dominating territories occupied by peoples the regime considers racially inferior. The space necessary for German expansion cannot be found in the West, for that region is closed. It must be sought in the East, in the Slavic lands, inhabited by human beings who barely deserve that title, and therefore do not warrant special compassion. German troops advance through Soviet territory with a speed that surprises even the most optimistic military planners. Within weeks, they penetrate hundreds of kilometers into enemy territory. The Red Army crumbles under the initial impact. The Germans capture over 1.5 million Soviet prisoners of war. It seems the dictator is on the verge of an overwhelming victory. But is this appearance of success truly what it seems to be? The operation known as Barbarossa presents itself as an extraordinary success. In Germany, there is relief and jubilation in the streets. The dictator's position as a great commander, briefly shaken by the Hess crisis, is restored in the eyes of the people. It seems the supreme leader is delivering the quick war he always promised. Communism will be defeated in weeks, and German victory is only a matter of time. Want to know what happens when reality collides with these expectations? Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of this saga of power and downfall. In the autumn of 1941, the dictator delivers a speech that echoes across the nation. He declares that Russia is being destroyed and will never rise again. In his mind, the war has already been won. Victory is certain, inevitable, a matter of time until the last Bolshevik is eliminated. But then something unexpected occurs. The progress of military operations begins to slow. The Russians, instead of giving up, begin to fight with a ferocity that surprises even the most experienced German commanders. The Soviet Union calls upon its seemingly infinite human reserves, mobilizing millions of additional soldiers, numbers that far exceed Germany's mobilization capacity. Behind the scenes, away from public view, German generals begin to express genuine concern about the magnitude of the task they face. There are reports of generals quietly questioning, "Christ, is this country really that vast?" Russia is so immense that covering it represents a logistical problem of almost impossible proportions to overcome. Supply lines stretch for hundreds of kilometers, making each advance more difficult than the last. At the German High Command, the generals plan their next moves in the war against the Soviet Union. Many are seriously alarmed by the scale of the challenge before them. But the dictator is unwilling to listen to their concerns. Instead, he summons them daily, demanding they keep pushing forward, that they accelerate the pace, that they allow nothing to stop them. He calls them cowards and threatens them with severe consequences if they do not obey. The problem is that you cannot make tanks, trucks, and soldiers move faster than logistical limitations allow. Physical reality does not bend to the will of a man, no matter how powerful he may be. The German generals do what they can with the available resources, but then something occurs that is completely beyond their control. The Russian winter arrives with all its relentless brutality. Temperatures drop to levels that freeze the very air one breathes. The ground freezes to a depth of almost 2 meters. You cannot even urinate outdoors without the liquid freezing instantly. Fuel freezes inside machinery. The German war machine literally freezes, immobilized by the extreme cold. But cold is not the only enemy. Hunger also afflicts the troops. German soldiers, accustomed to regular supplies, now face ever-dwindling rations. The best they can get is raw horse meat, because lighting a fire to cook it would reveal their position to Russian snipers positioned on rooftops. The situation becomes increasingly desperate. The men suffer from frostbite, dysentery, typhus, and psychological despair. What will be the breaking point for these suffering troops? Faced with these absolutely horrific conditions, the German army positioned outside Moscow is finally forced to execute a tactical retreat. For the dictator, this represents a serious setback. He promised the German people that the Soviet Union would be conquered in 6 weeks. More than 5 months have passed, and instead of victory, he faces the prospect of a prolonged war. How can he keep his promise of a quick war when reality is so radically different? Once again, Joseph Goebbels' propaganda machine springs into action. His solution is direct. Simply lie on a massive scale. He unleashes a barrage of propaganda content. Newsreels show German soldiers enjoying the snow and routing Russian rebels in glorious combat. Goebbels ensures that stirring and exciting newsreels are regular components of the German cinema-goer's entertainment diet. He keeps propaganda teams operating literally on the front lines, constantly pushing his cinematographers to advance as far as possible and capture the most exciting footage of military success. The dictator, far from being portrayed as someone who made a miscalculation in the war against the Soviet Union, is presented as an unparalleled military and strategic genius. But is this propaganda barrage truly working? Find out how the German population reacts to these monumental lies. Keep following along. Goebbels developed a sophisticated system to assess the effectiveness of his propaganda. He sends spies to infiltrate private conversations, recording what people truly think when they believe they are safe. The news that returns is all positive. There was a cinema in practically every German town, even in the smallest villages, and internal public opinion reports indicate that the population responded with extraordinary enthusiasm to the propaganda newsreels. People could hardly believe the dramatic and exciting scenes of German military success presented to them. Goebbels was a passionate lover of cinema and actively participated in the selection of films and actors. The dictator was also a great film enthusiast, so both understood that cinema was an extraordinarily powerful vehicle to connect with the German population on a deep emotional level. Goebbels outdid himself. His propaganda campaign is brilliant, sophisticated, and effective. But then a totally unexpected and unannounced development occurs. Japanese planes attack the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It is a devastating attack that kills thousands of American soldiers. The next day, the United States declares war on Japan. For the German dictator, this is a critical moment of decision. Japan is an ally, Should he allow the Japanese and Americans to fight each other while Germany watches? Or should he support his Japanese allies and enter the war against America? It is a decision of monumental importance, but the dictator ponders it completely alone, without adequately consulting his generals or ministers. The case against going to war with America is obvious. America is an economic power, a sleeping giant that the dictator knows possesses massive economic resources that, if transformed into military capability, could eventually affect his ability to win the world war. But for the dictator, this is only part of the equation. As he ponders the situation, the case for supporting Japan also seems strong. The two countries have a mutual understanding of support. There is a good chance that Japanese forces will keep America occupied in the Pacific, preventing it from supporting Great Britain on the Western Front. But above all, the dictator believes that Americans lack what the Germans possess in abundance: the will to fight to the end. The dictator views America with absolute contempt, as a mongrel racial melting pot filled with Hispanics and Jews, racially worthless and spiritually weak. He believes that Americans are too weak to endure a prolonged war, that they will accept peace terms that will leave Germany in control of Europe and Japan in control of the Pacific. But will this assessment of the American character prove correct? Finally, after only the briefest consultation with his advisors, the dictator makes his decision. 4 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he addresses the German parliament. Germany will declare war on America. What is remarkable about this decision to go to war with America in 1941 is how easily it was made. The dictator does not seem to have pondered it for very long. There is a murmur among the ranks of Parliament, but all are members of the dictator's political party, so no one dares to question. He explains that they could not wait for developments to overtake them. They had to take the initiative. America was seen as something very distant, a place that could not really harm Germany too seriously. It is a colossal decision, but the dictator made it almost unilaterally, consulting only his closest confidants. This decision will go down in history as his greatest strategic error, the blunder that would transform the course of the war. German forces are already bogged down in Russia, facing an enemy that refuses to give up. Now they will face the most powerful country in the world. Germany is about to be hit by a series of ferocious blows that will shatter the dictator's image as a great war commander and completely transform the nature of the conflict. Want to know how this catastrophic decision unleashed a series of events that led to total collapse? Stay with us. The impact of the dictator's decision to go to war with America is felt almost immediately throughout Germany. There is a growing understanding that this will no longer be a quick war. Behind the scenes, away from the eyes of official propaganda, bitter jokes circulate among the population. A candidate for the special military forces is asked if he is willing to enlist for the entire duration of the war. He replies yes, but only for the first 12 years. In bars and restaurants, conversations reflect a growing anxiety about the future. Goebbels' spies, infiltrated in these public spaces, detect a noticeable drop in public morale. It is time for a new propaganda initiative. In early December, the dictator delivers a speech to regional political party officials. He sees himself as the great military commander, a figure comparable to the greatest military leaders in history. He compares himself to Napoleon, to Frederick the Great, to Caesar. The dictator argues that victory is within reach, that it will still be a quick war, and that it will be followed by a glorious future in which Germany will grow rich from the lands and labor of the occupied territories of the East. He wants to be seen as the man who understands what best serves German interests militarily. And initially, it seems the dictator's prediction is coming true. Spring on the Eastern Front brings warmer weather. The German Sixth Army resumes the offensive. The industrial city of Stalingrad is besieged. Soviet defenders are confined to a tiny strip of land along the Volga River. Tens of thousands face a brutal death. Stalingrad represents the most brutal type of urban combat. No one would leave Stalingrad as they were before. Urban warfare is inherently chaotic and messy, and Stalingrad becomes a unique example of this particularly messy form of combat. The Germans seem to have victory in sight, but then the battle dramatically changes character. In a brilliant series of flanking maneuvers, the Russians smash through the German lines from the north and south. They meet west of the city, completely encircling the German forces. Suddenly, the tables are turned. Approximately 250,000 German soldiers are cut off from their supply lines. German forces soon face shortages of everything, from ammunition to food. Soldiers suffer from lice covering their clothes. They have to eat and drink next to comrades defecating nearby, because attempting to go out to use the toilet means being shot by a Russian sniper positioned on a rooftop. The situation is untenable. The only thing that would save the Germans would be a strategic tactical retreat. But will the dictator allow his soldiers to retreat, or will he insist on suicidal resistance? The dictator has now moved his headquarters to a massive complex of bunkers in eastern Poland, known as the Wolf's Lair. This is his new center of operations, located over 600 kilometers from the military command in Berlin. Here, away from the sight of the German people, the dictator convenes a crisis meeting. Most of his senior military leaders call for a strategic withdrawal. The alternative is the complete annihilation of an entire army. But the dictator makes another unilateral decision. The Germans will stand and fight to the last man. The supreme leader will not sanction retreat. Good Nazis do not retreat. They advance to victory. He believes in staying at one's post and dying if necessary, but never, under any circumstances, retreating. It is strategically absurd, militarily absurd. For the dictator's generals, this can only mean total disaster. But one man sees an opportunity in this crisis: Hermann Göring. Göring has a reputation as a powerful and effective leader. He was a brave and capable pilot soldier in the previous Great War, someone who earned genuine decorations for his service. He understands war because he lived it, because he was in it. Göring has been in the political movement since 1922. He transformed the paramilitary militias from a disorganized rabble into a formidable fighting force. He was wounded in the dictator's 1923 coup. As head of the German Air Force and the dictator's designated successor, Göring occupies imposing offices in the center of Berlin, not far from the dictator's headquarters. The dictator had great confidence in Göring, confidence that was justifiable. Göring's policies and strategies seemed to be working. He built the Air Force into a formidable power that would provide the means for blitzkrieg and allow attacks against enemies. His Air Force had proven decisive in the conquest of much of Europe. He proved to be a very capable commander indeed, one of the greatest, one might say, of the World War. Göring now supports the dictator's refusal to sanction a retreat from Stalingrad. Instead, he suggests that the army can be reinforced through aerial supplies using his air force. The dictator enthusiastically embraces the idea, but is Göring truly the man he once was, or has something fundamentally changed in his character? Göring is no longer the man he once was, nor does his judgment remain as sharp as it used to be. The man the German people believe to be a powerful commander is, in fact, a drug addict. He now relies heavily on morphine, an addiction that has transformed his behavior and clouded his judgment. Early in his career, Göring had been an intelligent and very capable man, but he gradually fell into indolence and apathy. He also developed a new interest that consumes all his attention: looted artifacts from across Europe. Stolen cultural artifacts have flowed into Germany in massive quantities. In every country the Germans occupy, their armed forces are quickly followed by specialized teams with a specific mission to bring cultural artifacts back to Germany. These range from literary manuscripts to priceless paintings and sculptures. At the heart of this operation is Göring. Göring sees himself as a connoisseur and a great expert in matters of art and culture, but he also has an eye for business. He wants money. He drafts orders specifying the types of paintings he wants brought to him at his country estate. The selfish side of Göring is fascinating to observe. By 1942, he had amassed a massive collection of stolen artworks. He possesses something like 1,200 precious objects and paintings in his personal possession. Göring is not alone in his passion for self-enrichment. Practically every official in Germany is involved in this great project of plunder. It is on such a massive scale that it cannot be controlled because practically everyone has a skeleton in their closet. Göring's preoccupation with drugs and art means he's no longer an effective commander or a good judge of the military situation. His plan to relieve Stalingrad is a disaster. He does not have enough planes or fuel. The promised airdrop turns into a complete failure. The initial estimate was that approximately 800 tons daily would be needed to keep those soldiers supplied. The reality is that they managed to deliver less than 100 tons per day. A soldier writes home, "If you live on one piece of bread divided among 8 men and a sip of warm water, you are having a good day." The German position in Stalingrad becomes untenable. Finally, at the end of the month, the German commander defies the dictator and surrenders. Almost 100,000 German soldiers are captured, including 24 generals. When the news reaches the dictator at the Wolf's Lair, he is horrified. It is a catastrophe of such enormous proportions that it will be impossible to hide from the German people. Once again, the man who must deliver the news is Joseph Goebbels. He understands that this will require a new message. Out goes the idea of a quick victory. In comes the idea of unique German courage and heroism. The theme here, as in many other statements from this period, is that true German character only emerges in the face of defeat and immense suffering. Goebbels expounds his new theme in a speech that many consider the highlight of his career. Under a large banner reading, "Total War, Shorter War," Goebbels speaks to an audience of 14,000 cheering and admiring fans. It is an appeal to the morale of the people, an attempt to shift gears, moving from support for the war, initially based on enthusiasm for quick victory, to an idea of endurance and embracing suffering. Near the end of the speech, he launches into 10 rhetorical questions that demand increasingly loud yeses from the audience. Do you want total war? And everyone shouts, yes. He then asks, do you want a total war that is even more radical and brutal than you can possibly imagine? And they reply, yes, of course we do. But will this emotional manipulation be enough to keep the German people fighting? Goebbels also has a second message. The talk of German heroism is underpinned by fear. Goebbels repeatedly places before the German people a nightmare vision where they would be driven from their historic and ancestral lands in the East. Their women would be raped. Their young people would be enslaved and deported to Siberia. They had no choice but to keep fighting. It is a message that most Germans are willing to accept, but now, for the first time, there is also open opposition. In Munich, a group of students calling themselves the White Rose Group circulate anti-Nazi leaflets and paint anti-dictator graffiti. They travel through universities across Germany, putting up small posters saying things like mass murderer or simply the word freedom. It is an extraordinary example of how totalitarian the regime had become, that even posting the word freedom on a wall was considered against the state. The opposition is quickly suppressed, but the German people are about to face another devastating blow. Discover how America's full entry into the war completely transformed Germany's destiny. Don't miss the next segment. For 18 months, American arms and troops have flowed across the Atlantic. The most powerful industrial country in the world has entered a state of total mobilization for war. What America can do is transform its factories into machines for producing planes and tanks at extraordinary speeds. Automobile factories convert into tank production lines. Typewriter factories transform into machine gun production. The result is catastrophic for the Germans. In the early summer of that year, American troops joined British forces in routing the Germans in North Africa. A month later, the Western Allies cross the Mediterranean and invade Italy. It is a shock to many German military leaders who recognize that the war against America is now turning against German interests. The Americans, once dismissed by the dictator as weak, are attacking the soft underbelly of the German Empire. Within weeks, the Italian fascist leader Benito Mussolini is overthrown in a popular uprising. Germany loses its most important European ally. The new Italian leaders speak of surrender. Now, finally, the utter folly of the dictator's declaration of war on America becomes apparent. The dictator receives the news at the Wolf's Lair. He is horrified. Mussolini is one of his oldest and most faithful allies. The dictator was deeply disturbed by Mussolini's downfall. He had a deep affection for Mussolini as a leader and, some say, some affection for him as a person. The dictator orders German troops into Italy to stem the advance of Allied forces. But this means spreading the German army very thin. They are being pushed back in Russia. They face the threat of a renewed Allied attack in the west. And they are trying to hold Italy and the Mediterranean coast. But then something happens that is impossible to spin as anything but absolutely terrible. Over the skies of Germany, Allied aircraft bomb the country's cities day and night. The bombing of Germany becomes much more serious in early 1943, and from then until the end of the war, it becomes an ever-present horror, a nightly agony for German cities. In August of that year, Hamburg, one of Germany's most important industrial cities, is devastated in a firestorm. At least 40,000 people die in one night. The dictator responds with a highly significant shift in domestic policy. That summer, the dictator appoints Heinrich Himmler, the feared head of the SS, as Minister of the Interior. Himmler is a fanatical Nazi, a man who likes to cultivate the image of a dashing warrior. He lives for the dictator, lives for the greatness of the German cause, and everything is subordinated to that. He is a frightening man, one of the most disturbing of all the Nazis. Himmler's appointment is a clear sign that the dictator can no longer rely on the goodwill of his people. From now on, his position will depend on pure repression. But even now, most Germans have no idea how terrible their situation truly is. Hidden from view, the man in whom they place their faith is in deep personal trouble. The dictator has withdrawn almost completely to his bunker at the Wolf's Lair in eastern Poland. He is simply unable to accept the reality of the situation. The German people begin to notice that they haven't seen the dictator for some time. There are certain key events where the dictator would normally appear, such as Heroes' Day, a kind of memorial for those who had fallen. That year, the dictator does not appear, and this is very much noticed. He sits there every evening having his dinner surrounded by his secretaries, increasingly because he does not want to talk to his generals because they will only tell him bad news. He's not yet 55 years old, but he appears to be a man who moves more slowly. He's no longer the dictator he once was. He's losing his energy. He takes long walks with his dog. He becomes very stooped and begins to tremble, possibly from what we now believe to be Parkinson's. The dictator is now almost entirely dependent on the company of just two people. One is his girlfriend, Eva Braun. He calls Eva Braun every day, something he had never done before, seeking some solace in her conversation. The other is his personal doctor, Theodore Morel, who is administering large quantities of antidepressants and homemade narcotics. Not only are the drugs themselves potent and harmful, but there is also an extraordinary amount of them. He is taking testosterone. He is on a barbiturate suppository. He is on several stimulants. He is on sedatives. He is on analgesics. He is on something to help with acute and chronic constipation. Still, the German people remain completely ignorant of the fact that the dictator is a shadow of his former self. His position has always depended on success, on concealing the shocking reality of his regime. But now he is losing the war. The German people will inevitably begin to wake up to the truth, and some, finally, will fight back. The propaganda machine that sustained his power for over a decade is beginning to disintegrate. The lies that kept an entire nation in a trance are becoming increasingly transparent. Reality, that relentless force that no propaganda can suppress indefinitely, is finally penetrating the curtain of illusion. Did you see how a man who promised 1,000 years of glory led his nation to the abyss? Leave your like, comment your reflections on how absolute power absolutely corrupts, and subscribe to the channel for more epic stories of war, betrayal, and the fall of empires that shaped world history.